Katie here, and today on the Esoteric Word, we are going to talk about the prodigal son. And so while Peter is, I am going to read to you about the story. So Jesus tells a parable about a father who has two sons. It's early, and the father gives it to him. The son leaves home, goes to a distant land, and wastes all of his money on reckless living. Welcome, Peter. When the famine hits, he becomes desperate and ends up feeding with the pigs. He's so hungry that even the pig's food looks good to him. Realizing how far off he has fallen, he decides to return home, planning to ask his father to take him back as a servant. But when he is still far off in the distance, his father sees him, runs to him, and embraces him, and welcomes him home with joy, not as a servant, but as a beloved son. They celebrate with a feast. Meanwhile, the older brother, who stayed and worked dutifully, becomes angry that the reckless brother is being celebrated. The father gently reminds his son, "You were always with me, and everything I have is yours, but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found." So thank you again, Peter, for meeting me and for having these conversations. So when we listen to this parable, what is the first thing that it brings up for you?
Thank you, Katie. It's always nice having these conversations on Saturday morning. Um, we're exploring the depth of esotericism and the depth of the scripture from an esoteric lens. What this brings up essentially is the soul's journey. The soul descends from source and comes into the mature dimension and returns to the source. And when it returns, it returns with gifts, it returns with new expansions and levels of consciousness. And of course, we have the aspect of the brother as well, saying, why the elder brother, why do you have to give all of this energy, so to speak, invest all of this energy in the younger brother to go and explore the mature dimension? So again, the whole parable is an expose on our journey, how we descend from source, each one of us, individual pieces of soul or source. We come down. And, I was just talking with Katie about, I believe strongly that descent actually induces some fear. That is the birth of our fears. Because imagine you're all powerful. Imagine a king or a president, and we say, hey, we're going to strip away all of your power, all of your authority, and we want you to go and live on the streets. There's going to be that apprehension. I don't have anyone to call for help. I won't have any money. I won't have any access to anyone. So the soul descending from that level of authority or connection with source to a level of being in a human form also induces some form of uncertainty and self-doubt as well.
Yeah, one of our friends, I don't know if you had an opportunity to see it, Peter, but they put into one of our Facebook Messenger groups about these two twins that are in utero. They're still in the mom's tummy. And the one twin says, you know, what is it going to be like after we are out of our mom's tummy? And the other one says, um, you know, I don't know. That's terrifying. There's the unknown. And the other one's like, what if it's beautiful? And then the scared one says, you know, but maybe there is no mother. How do we even know the mother exists? I don't know if you can hear me right now. Okay, because your screen is frozen. And so it's really interesting to see how we do carry this fear and we live from that space rather than a powerful space of knowing that we're always supported and that Father is always there around us.
Absolutely.
So I am going to move rooms just so that my computer catches up. And also, I remember we were talking a little bit about unification and individuation, or unification of individuation. And so I'm just going to mute myself and walk while you talk about that.
For sure, Katie. In Jungian psychology and esoteric psychology as well, the process of emanation of our soul from source and the descent into the material dimension and the return to source is called the process of individuation or the unification of individuation. This means that when we are in source, just imagine we are a molecule in the ocean that we call source. We sort of don't have an identity until a thought is birthed in our mind that says, hey, what if I can come out of this ocean and explore, have an adventure, and see what it is like to be a hero? And my tool is I want to be a hero of justice, or I want to be a hero of righteousness, of peace, of wisdom, of love, or of power. We have a specific theme that within the mind of Source, each one of us are just ideas within the mind of Source. Source wants to explore a specific theme. And so we go into the material dimension to explore, to practicalize, to apply, to create that specific theme, or to express that specific theme. And then we return to Source, um, accumulating all of that wealth of wisdom, all of that wealth of experience. And that return process, we don't return to source and dissolve. Some people sometimes may think that when we return to heaven, we just dissolve into God and for eternity we don't exist anymore. But in reality, or in actuality, because reality is every person's idea of their existence, but in actuality, what the scriptures tell us and what the Vedas and what all the ancient texts tell us and Jungian psychology is that we return to source as an individual piece of source. We don't just merge and become, unconscious, so to speak. We return to source as an individual consciousness. And that is the process of individuation, coming out of source to return to source as an individual piece of entity in itself, not returning and fused back and not having any consciousness.
Uh, that's really beautiful. And thinking about when we come to Earth, I remember recently we shared about how we're born with everything and we leave with nothing. And so when we're born with everything, it's like we start to fall into the material world, right? And start to get entangled with the different impulses. So some of us did watch Pinocchio as a teen and just seeing how he just kept going impulse after impulse. And I said, oh, that's embarrassing. Sometimes that's like me. And hi, John. Hi, Lonnie. Oh, I'm going to call you Lonnie. Um, and welcome, Trish. So it's interesting to see how we do get into these habits of that we don't even realize they're just patterns that we start to fall into. I often ask clients, do you experience pain? And they say no. Then within 5 minutes of doing a foot bath, I say, do you experience much stiffness in your joints? And they say yes. And I'm like, that is pain, but we don't realize it because we've become so complacent that it's just become a part of who we are. Same with our impulses and our desires that may not be leading us or serving us. And so, what would you like to say about the impulses and going back to being honoring that God self within us?
Absolutely. Yeah, the story tells us here that, he squandered all of the inheritance. And the story parallels how God invests into us all of this energy. The Bible says that the mercies of the Lord are new every morning, or the grace of the Lord is new every morning, meaning that God gives us every day a measure of energy to utilize. And even coming to earth and being born, we are given like a deposit, a down payment, so to speak, to utilize in earth, to invest that energy. And so for the most part, our culture and general, the collective has a belief in the central nature of existence, more of the materialist view that we're here to, just fulfill all of our impulses, bodily desires, or, self-gratification. And for the most part, what that does is that it squanders all of our divine energy when we are just following after our impulses and following after the senses, not just not just our energy or our vibration, but it also squanders a lot of things in relationships, what have you. Because the more a person invests all of the energy that God has given them on the physical aspects in the psyche, because nothing is happening externally, we always have to remember that even though we're experiencing the physical, the perspective with which we communicate esoteric knowledge is not from the physical dimension, but more from from the mental or the soul level. So recognizing that our experience, any experience we have, is taking place within the context of our mind. So when we are investing all of the energy that God has given us on thoughts that have to do with the material, oh, I need this, I have to satisfy this, I have this feeling, blah, blah, blah. we're using all of our energy, we're doing a transaction, we're transacting, exchanging our energy for thought. We're buying thought with our energy, and we can choose to buy, low vibrating thoughts, like, oh, I feel like having this experience, or blah blah blah. Or we can choose with the money, with the energy we're giving, to buy high vibrating thoughts. And when we invest in high vibrating thoughts, which means things are in line with our soulful calling, in line with God, in line with divine plan, when we invest our energy on higher vibrating thoughts, we get compound interest on that investment. So God will give us some more energy in return for that investment. Um, so to that point, getting quantumly entangled in the material dimension leads to the suffering. And that's what we see in the story, that he then began to suffer.
And so I really appreciate what you're saying because, sometimes when we say we create our own reality, we don't actually understand fully what that means. And it's truly about our thoughts. So, like, my programmed childhood thinking is different than your programmed childhood thinking. So, when we hear a story or see a situation happen in life, we have our own worldview that we see it in. And so, we are creating our own reality based off of these patterns. And so, when we can start to align with our higher calling and start to make choices based off of that, then it does become easier. And however, also, like you're saying, that oftentimes there's hardship and suffering as we're making these new choices because we have become so entangled with our old ways of being that it's like a death to our ego or a death to a version of ourselves, right? And so sometimes it can be a little hard or uncomfortable. And I know that we talk a lot about the soul's divine journey, which can also be considered the hero's journey. And so, oftentimes, when our life is going just fine and everything's normal, and then all of a sudden there's this crazy disruption, and we think that it's like, this terrible thing. However, it's us being reformed and molded with. Um, Sometimes I know you say, Peter, that, God is nudging us and telling us, okay, wake up, wake up. And if you're not listening, then oftentimes he'll dump a whole bucket of water on you. So, so looking at right now in life and how a lot of us are going through, because there is this shift in energy and consciousness going on, and I know that a lot of the people that we work with are feeling it and seeing it. And so, just what would be some of the ways that you would uh, suggest that people move through this hardship and suffering, like especially when it comes to the mind?
Yeah, good question, Katie. And we can take an example, of the prodigal son here. When we go through hardship, the key thing is that it's a process that is drawing us inwards. Again, you talked about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And I'll just caveat to say that I believe strongly that the hero's journey is the series of cycles or the wrongs that we experience as souls until we get to the return. So we can think of we can think of our journey as like ladders, Jacob's ladder, and we can think of the hero's journey as each of those levels, rungs on the ladder. This is level one, hero's journey two. So the hero's journey is the series within the soul's return. And so every time we face those suffering and those difficulties, it's a call for us to touch our soul once again, for personality to reach out to the soul, and then to gain an idea of the divine agenda, so to speak, the divine mandate, what's called the heavenly plan. Each one of us, we are a piece in this big puzzle. And and when the person is not fulfilling their part, they're not fixed into the puzzle, they're not placed into that massive drama, so to speak. So everybody has a unique position in the cosmic drama, and most of the time people are misaligned, and that leads to the suffering. In order to transcend suffering is the connection to the soul. The connection to the soul makes a person realize that duality, the nature of the physical world, is both suffering, pain, and pleasure. And that's the ability to transcend it, is recognizing that we are not changed. If we have $1 million, we are still a soul. If we have $0, we're still a soul. We are not changed irrespective of what's happening in the material dimension. The true core self is the same, irrespective of the experience on the external. And that ability to transcend suffering means that the soul touches, or the individual reclaims, recollects itself and touches its soul, and then it gets the divine wisdom or agenda or plan or whatever, the divine mandate back again. And then it's able to reintegrate itself into the world, like in Joseph Campbell's journey, hero's journey, reintegrate into the world with new sets of tools and gifts and understanding of oneself.
I really appreciate all of what you just said, and a couple of things that I really enjoyed chatting with you about is that there is like no real good or bad, right? It's what we perceive it to be. And so when we can step outside and become that observer, then we can not attach to those emotions so deeply. So when things happen, it's not such a big thing. To think of like God's understanding is so big, a human can't understand like a God can. And so it's nice to start to embody that separation little by little so that, hi, Tim, I love your poems. Thanks for sending them to me and keeping me in the loop. So just seeing that, yeah, nothing is good or bad, and that when we are misaligned, then some things may happen. And even sometimes when we're aligned, things will happen, but it's how do we view it and how do we move through it, and reaching out and having that higher understanding from a higher perspective. And then also talking to you, Peter, about making changes personally. Um, Actually, I was telling Tim one time, I was like, Tim, I think I need to quit drinking alcohol. But everybody tells me I'm not an alcoholic. And Tim said, Katie, drinking and alcoholism is not it's not a drinking problem, it's a thinking problem. And I was like, oh, you're so right. Everybody, and he said everybody could benefit from going to AA because you learn a new understanding, right? And I was like, that's really cool. But thinking about making changes, and I was like, Peter, I don't know if I want to say I'm never going to drink again or never going to eat meat again because those are big things to like say forever, right? And I do like with AA, they say just for today. But and when we align with our higher purpose, we don't have to make those decisions because they're made for us. And so it's an easier space to come from. And so I think that when we can have our goals out in front of us, we live from more of an aligned space rather than thinking of our past and continuing to live that same reality. So the mind is a powerful tool. And when it's used properly, right? Even when it's not. So gaining a deeper understanding of how to use our mind is a super
Yeah,
blessing and big tool for as we're becoming more conscious and
yeah.
creating that unification.
Yeah, and to your point as well, I believe that it's recognizing that the mind is like a boardroom, and that's why we teach in archetypal psychology to explain to people that the nature of the mind or the nature of the psyche is containing elements of thought forms, and each of those elements are the things that drive the psyche or drive consciousness. So, in reality, in order for us to awaken and to connect to our soulful purpose, it's the ability to transcend our mind, to become the leaders of the boardroom, to become the owners of that boardroom. All of the aspects of ourselves that, I was speaking to a person recently, and they were saying, I want to stop sugar. An aspect of me was like, oh yeah, I have to take that sugar. But I said, no, I'm not going to have that sugar. Just thinking about that interaction alone within ourselves already tells us that there are two aspects. There's an aspect that wants something, and there's an aspect that I say, no, I wouldn't. And so when we begin to recognize that the true I self within us is the one that is supposed to parent the other aspects, the other minds, or so to speak, the other archetypes, archetypal pattern within us, we begin to awaken to the true I self, to become the leader of the boardroom. And the true I self is the one that is connected to the soul. By becoming the leader of the boardroom, we transcend the mind. The mind is supposed to be a tool of consciousness. Majority of the time, the I self is subsumed, is buried within the mind. And so it's following the dictates of the mind, and the dictates of the mind come from the sensual body, comes from the senses, comes from the desire body, comes from the intellect as well, where you find things like, arrogance and ignorance. Um, so the ability for us to awaken to our I self means, first of all, that we reconnect with our soul. The mind is put aside. We transcend the mind and we begin to recondition, reprogram the narrative within the subconscious or within the lower mind itself. And that process also makes us, first of all, the observer of the mind. That's the first thing, that we're observing the thoughts that are taking place in the mind. we're not trying as much as possible to shift the physical world. That's not the idea of awakening. Awakening is to transcend, to come out of the thought forms and to become the owner of all of those thoughts. Then we awaken to our true I self. And then the other thing about that is each of those aspects of us, as we mature, as we awaken, we recondition them, we reprogram them to give them the ideas that are from the soul, not the ideas, so to speak, that are from the material dimension. Because the material dimension contains the concept of polarization. Everything is good or bad. However, we recognize that everything is within God, so that really we can't distinguish them as good and bad. We can only distinguish them as levels of consciousness. We can say how close is this thing from God, or how far away is it from God. That is what people call good and evil, is the proximity to a thing or a concept to the knowledge of God, or far away from God. And both are in God. It's like saying a baby versus an adult. You can have a household and you can have a baby who is thinking, I just want to, have candy, or you can have an adult who is saying, hey, what decisions are we making? But both are contained in God. So to your point again, Katie, is the narrative, our understanding of suffering and duality, pain and pleasure, we transcend that where we awaken to our I self and we're connected to our soulful purpose.
Thank you. And then that does also lead us back into the parable, right? Because once we start to awaken, that's when we're like, okay, we are living in a desolate land. We want to eat swine food. Like seriously thinking about it, why do you want to drink alcohol? It like really doesn't do much for yourself. And so it's just funny to think about. And then he decides to go home to his father's house. And so that's when we're deciding to make those better decisions. And congratulations, Trish, on day 6 for not drinking and no sugar. Um, I'm on day 1. And so, yeah, and then we come back to our father's home. And oftentimes we can be very self-critical for the choices that we've made in the past. And so I think that it's really beautiful to see the loving and forgiveness of the Father, right? And we can give that same kind of grace to ourselves. And it does make it easier to make better choices. When we're thinking negative thoughts about ourselves, we're often likely to keep those cycles. But when we can see, you've done this, and this is where, again, where you're wanting to go, and have that in the forefront of your mind, like Trish and I were talking about the clarity. And when we're not even sober from alcohol, but from sugar, and when we eat more organically and all the different things that really do compound within us. So eating and drinking and thinking healthier, it makes us a clearer vessel for to be a conduit for God to be us to be out picturing God on this earth, right? We're here to take care of one another and to spread the light. And so when we can take out some of those impurities, it really helps us to be able to be in alignment with our soul's calling. And so is there anything that you want to say about loving forgiveness and divine mercy?
Yeah, what happens typically within our psyche. Again, I believe that this conversation is tying in spirituality and psychology. That's what we do, Katie. We do psychospirituality. And so what happens within our psyche typically, you think about the prodigal son's experience, right? Just to answer your point about, forgiveness. The prodigal son getting to a place where there's desolation, he's destitute, devastated, there's famine in the land, destruction of all of his dreams. At that state, he'll probably be experiencing self-criticism as well. He'll probably be saying, why did I make this decision? Why did I spend that money? Why did I, go to those parties? Why did I? All of those thoughts will probably be arising in his psyche. And all of those thoughts, again, from an archetypal perspective, are coming from his archetypal patterns. It could be his inner child saying, oh, I shouldn't have had so much fun. Or his warrior saying, I didn't accomplish my vision, for example. Or his creator saying, I could have created something more pleasant in this world. All of those thought forms coming from the archetypal patterns create within the individual criticism, self-criticism, self-judgment, what have you. But what eradicates the criticism or the critical voice that we have in our, that most people have in the psyche, What eradicates that self-judgment is forgiveness and mercy, is the higher self, our higher mind, recognizing that the whole journey, the whole process is a learning process. And so we don't look at mistakes as, something to beat ourselves over the head, or to condemn oneself because, well, we tend to then realize a mistake as a learning opportunity, recognizing that the concept of being incarnated on the physical plane on the earth, the whole idea is to learn. The whole idea is for us to gain some lessons and gain some expansion in our awareness, in our level of consciousness, gain some knowledge, so to speak, from the experience in the material dimension. And we return to source being, it's like parents sending a child to school and the child comes back home with a graduation certificate. Here's my certificate. I graduated from school. And so by being able to forgive oneself for the mistakes or the errors, the higher self saying, it's okay, you did that test and maybe we didn't do very well in that one, but it's okay, we've learned the lesson, we understand that, I see, if I act this way, it's not very good. Changing the narrative of punishment and suffering and pain, thinking about it, differently, recognizing that it's only a lesson. God is not punishing us, or we're not going through suffering. God is not, putting us through a process of suffering. We incarnate here to suffer. No, we're here to grow through learning. We're here to grow through creating. We're here to grow through expressing ourselves and experiencing ourselves. We're able to see ourselves, how we look on the physical and natural dimension, and make adjustments to be more in line, in tune with Source God. And that perspective is self forgiving, is not self judging. It's loving of oneself and loving of everything external to oneself as well.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate we're getting ready to do our inner contract course workshop right after this at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And just knowing that we can create inner harmony and coherence within those aspects of ourself is a beautiful thing. We are at 9:29, so I'm going to read the conclusion that we have written here. I really like that you do this, that you create this uh, PDF for us, Peter. So the timeless narrative of return. In essence, the parable of the prodigal son, interpreted esoterically, is a timeless depiction of the soul's journey. And the bullet points are self-discovery and individualization, encounter with the illusion in the material world, eventual awakening through experience and hardship, loving reunion with the divine source. And the parable underscores the importance of personal experience and spiritual living, the inevitability of the soul's return to its origin, and the unwavering love and forgiveness awaiting all who sincerely seek to return. This path of return, though often challenging and involving pain, ultimately leads to the realization of the kingdom of heaven within the recognition of the divine self, which is in each and every one of us. So we look forward to continuing to grow together. Thank you for being here. And Tim, thank you for putting your poem in the chat box here. And everybody follow Peter on his page and also follow Nick on his page. He has a lot of great wisdom that he brings forth as well. So we're all in it together. Thank you so much.